Hey guys, I've been talking all day, so hopefully this will be a quick test review for you. It should. Okay, let's jump right into this. So, psychology, the modern definition, the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Behavior, really coming from the behaviorists, purely observable behaviors, mental processes influenced by Freud, the humanist, and the cognitivist. Beginnings of Psychology, person that you must know, father of psychology, Wilhelm Wundt. His major research method was introspection. Introspection was his form of measuring people's responses to external stimuli. We still use introspection to a certain degree. The parents or the disciplines that originally influenced psychology would have been philosophy or physiology. Modern scientific psychology is divorced from the two and made into its own science. He's also noted for having the first lab in Leipzig, Germany, devoted explicitly to G. Stanley Hall. His big kind of notable achievements, first journal in psychology, but also he is the first president and he launches the American Psychological Association. William James, very important. We will talk about him in reference to the James Lange theory. And really, if you were to take a much more in depth history class about psychology, has far more of an impact than the schools of psychology. Now, this isn't exhaustive, but this is really kind of the basics that you should know. And a lot of these things will go into more depth as we go through the curriculum. Know that structuralism, look at the word structure. Think of a very large wall made of Legos. If I were to for psychoanalysis, the big word, and I have it in bold for you, is unconscious. Any question that deals with the unconscious, I will tell you about 95% of the time, immediately go back to Freud, and maybe 5% of the time you're going to look at Jung or Alfred Adler, but really this is Freud. It's going to be the first method of psychotherapy, really the first method of therapy that addresses psychology. Freud's also going to be noted for studying personality, and his big kind of contribution is making psychology something that is interesting to the everyday layperson. But again, studied the existence of the unconscious mind. Psychoanalysis and psychodynamic are the behaviorist movement. Other approaches, the cognitive approach. Cognitions are your thought processes. So if you see a word like interprets or thinks or assumes or solves, any of those things that gives you an understanding that the person or the person in the scenario is utilizing a thought process, it is a cognitive approach. So if I tell you the reason that you fight with your parents is because you think that the minute the word think starts popping in there and it's nothing purely observable and it's not unconscious, then it's definitely cognitive. Humanistic, this is going to have to do with free will, free choice. People are good. It does not allow for the possibility of evil. And the biggest shortcoming of this approach is that it is very philosophical in nature. So there's not a whole lot of scientific research done in it. Again, it's very philosophical in nature. Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow are the big ones. You should know the difference between clinical psychology and counseling psychology. Clinical psychology has to do often with a hospital setting, diagnosing people with very severe mental illnesses, to include things like schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, etc. Counseling psychology, not going to deal with the extremes like you would with clinical psychology and not as often in a hospital setting. You're going to deal with people with more manageable symptoms that still kind of go about their normal daily life. Here's a really First definition, no theory versus hypothesis. So a theory is a testable explanation for a set of facts or observations. This is going to be distinct from a hypothesis, which will actually tell you it is looking at two variables and the relationships to each other, specifically in a cause and effect scenario. So for this theory, we're looking at hypothesis, a statement describing the relationship among variables in a study. So usually we're talking about independent and dependent. I will tell you that the textbook usually talks about at least two variables and how one may cause another, and it's a predictive statement. Theories don't predict and they don't talk about the relationship amongst variables. So just keep those kind of little bits in mind so you know when you're looking at a definition for a theory versus a definition for a hypothesis. Operational definitions. Make sure that when you're looking at an operational definition or questions about it, one, operational definitions allow for researchers to replicate studies. It's the difference between saying, I want eggs in this cake versus I need you to crack 2 eggs and put in this cake. It is that is difference between having a recipe and having someone give you a general idea of what the ingredients might be. An operational definition is applied to both the independent variable and the dependent variable, and it specifies exactly what they mean. So when I say more sleep, I haven't really specified what I mean by more. More might be 5 minutes to one person and 2 hours to another. So I need to sit there and actually quantify more. More is 4 hours of sleep. Better grades, I need to physically quantify that. Better grades to one person might be the increase of 1%, which is nothing, Independent versus dependent variable. Please know the difference. Your independent variable is present in your experimental group or your experimental condition. This is the change or the manipulation. Your population is everybody. So think of this as a hierarchy. Everybody is in the population. Everybody that your research can talk to or talk about or be applied to is in the population. From that population, you can't take all 2 billion people. You maybe can extract 1,000, and you want that sample to look like the population just by percentages. So at random, like drawing names from a hat, you pull a sample from your population. Once you have that sample, you have 1,000 people and you need to put them into the control group and the experimental group, 500 in each. If you do it with intent, you may actually cause a confounding variable. So to prevent a confounding variable, you will randomly assign your sample to the control group and the experimental group, like pulling names from a hat. Literally, you will take that sample group and without intent, you will put 500 people in the control group and 500 people in the experimental group completely at random. They are randomly assigned to either the control group or they're randomly assigned to the experimental group. So one more time, population, everybody. Random sample, a selection of people from the population done without intent, like pulling names from a hat. The sample is then distributed into a control group and the experimental group by random assignment, being that those people were, again, without intent, put into one of No, the experiment is the only one that can give you a cause and effect statement. Problems, it's artificial and it's not applicable to all situations. In other words, sometimes it's unethical to run the experiment. Case studies. We use these when we can get information about something that wouldn't otherwise ethically be able to be conducted. We get as much information as possible. Biggest drawback to the case study, can't apply to all similar scenarios. They are going to be unique to themselves to a certain degree. The more case studies we have, the more information we have, and the more we can draw maybe a correlation or a general conclusion, but we can never say cause and effect. Naturalistic observation, literally observing people in their natural environment. Problem with that, correlational studies. Correlations provide you with relationships. They cannot give you cause and effect. That will definitely be tested. So correlational coefficient can go anywhere from -1 to +1, 0 being no correlation. A negative correlation, as one variable increases, the other decreases. A positive correlation, as one variable increases, the other increases, or positive correlation, as one variable decreases, the other decreases. It establishes only a relationship. So again, smoking may cause cancer, but it doesn't always cause cancer. So there is no cause and effect. We can just sit there and say there's a greater likelihood. Be careful with bias, researcher bias or experimenter bias. The way that we combat that is with a double-blind procedure. In other words, neither the researcher nor the participants know who is in the control group or who is in the experimental group until Basic statistics, frequency distribution. This is a chart that's last little bit is ethics. When we're looking at the ethics, you're going to have an institutional review board or an IRB. They are going to be your oversight committee for any research. You are allowed to be deceptive as long as you debrief at the end of your research. So you can lie to participants about what is the real focus of your research, as long as at the end you give them a full debriefing, full disclosure of what the intent of the research was. Usually an informed consent at the beginning of your research. You will let them know that deception may be involved. You have to tell them that they're free to leave at any time, and you have to let them be fully aware of any risks that will be possible throughout your research.